Throughout NBA history, there have only been 15 times when a player was able to score 70 points or more in an NBA game. Now, most of these performances belong to the myth that is Wilt Chamberlain, so if we were to remove 60s basketball, the number of performances gets trimmed down all the way to 8. We have David Thompson's 73, David Robinson's 71, Kobe Bryant's 81 performance, and Devin Booker, who scored 70 points on the dot. And amongst these players, it took nearly 40 years for us to see these 4 performances. Now bring us to where we are today, and the last 4 70-point performances basically happened within a calendar year's time. And what's even more mind-blowing is that 2 of them happened within the same week. And the mind-blowing scoring performances don't even stop there. So far this season, there have already been 5 60-point performances, the highest mark the league has seen since 1963, and we're only roughly midway through the regular season. 9 out of the top 10 highest offensive ratings for a team are all happening this year. And the only team that's missing out of that top 10 are the Sacramento Kings from last year, who had the highest offensive rating in NBA history. And so far this season, there have already been 6 teams able to eclipse that mark. Teams are nearly averaging 116 points on a night-to-night basis, the highest the league has seen since 1970. And so far this season, there are 54 players in the NBA averaging 20 points or more, which is the second highest mark in the history of this fine association. And compare that to where we were just at a decade ago, it's more than twice as many. So what does all this mean? Well, of course, we're in the golden era of offense, a point of time in NBA history where an offensive phenomenon is occurring right in front of us, where we have peak level offense being married with some of the most skilled bucket getters in NBA history, with the prioritization of spacing and pacing working in unison with a level of skills that have far transcended the predecessors who laid the groundwork for today's NBA offensive stars, while also having the offensive open-mindedness that has transcended the mentality of basketball guys that we've seen before us that would even dare allow a 7'5" man to handle the basketball. But oh no, y'all want to talk about how bad the defense is.
Is this recent rise in scoring, is that good for the NBA?
This is bad basketball defensively.
If the fans like it, I don't like it.
Defense has gotten softer, I'll put it that way.
Nobody now is playing with this.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
They got no Alvin Robinson.
Because I know Bird and Jordan and Isaiah and Magic played with that.
What transpired last night in Atlanta was disgraceful. It made me feel like let's just go out and get somebody that don't want. You don't have to play defense. All you got to do is play offense.
Sure. So over the past month of basketball, we've seen a lot of historic scoring performances. And when NBA fans see all of these crazy numbers being posted up, we tend to ask the question, why and how is all of this happening? And normally, over the past 2 to 3 years, when this question is prompted, we tend to just highlight how skilled and special a lot of the offensive talent is in today's league. But this time it is certainly different, because the old heads are screaming at the top of their lungs to get off of their lawn while they preach to us how in today's game there is far less defense being played. And you know what? They're right, but not because of the same reasons that they try to tell you. But before we take a deeper dive into today's defense and compare it to yesteryear, it is very important, and I do mean very important, that I always highlight the significance of pace and space. At this point, the conversation about offense in the NBA is happening basically every single year, and yet it still blows me away how quickly people just overlook the 2 biggest factors to how many points are being scored on a night-to-night basis. First, you have pace, which essentially means how fast the game is being played. The faster the game means there's more possessions, and with more possessions obviously means that there's more opportunities to score. And over the past 6 years, the pace in the NBA has been roughly around 99 to 100, which is the highest that the league has seen since the late 80s. So to all of the ex-players and NBA fans who are comparing today's game to what was going on in the late 90s and early 2000s, which is literally some of the slowest years in NBA history, of course, they're going to score more points in today's game in contrast to those years, because the pace is higher, and with a higher pace, you have more possessions, and more possessions means you have more opportunities to score. And then we have the second part of the equation, which is space, which essentially in today's game means a bunch of three-point shooting. So far this season, teams are attempting 35 three-pointers while shooting nearly 37% with a long ball, meaning that they're making 12.8 threes on a night-to-night basis. Now, if you're wondering where exactly are all these three-pointers coming from, well, it's because in today's game, offensively, the NBA is much more strategic on the shot selection and have effectively cut out the most inefficient shot in the NBA, and that is a lot of mid-range shooting, in particular, long mid-range shots. If we go back through NBA history, we can see the level of frequency where teams used to take their shots from. And back in 1998, nearly 29% of the shots in the NBA were taken from 0 to 3 feet from the basket. Nearly 18% of the shots were taken in between 3 to 10 feet. And then when you get to the mid-range jumpers and long twos, 16% of the shots were taken in between 10 to 16 feet, and 21% of the shot attempts were taken in between 16 feet to the three-point line. Now compare that to today's game, where 24% of the shots are taken from 0 to 3 feet, 21% of the shots are taken from 3 to 10 feet, and only 10% of the shots are taken from 10 to 16 feet, while less than 6% of the shots are taken from 16 feet to the three-point line. And as you can clearly see, there is a staggering difference. And for those who are wondering, where did the 20% of shots just magically go to? Well, it's three-point shooting. Because in today's game, over 39% of the shots come from behind the arc, whereas in 1998, only 16% of the shots came from behind the arc. And when you look at these numbers from a practical sense, it's pretty hard to deny the impact of three-point shooting. Because in one era, you have 20 shots that are all mid-range jump shots in a league where they're converting them at roughly 40% of the time, which means that on those 20 shots, the NBA back in 1998 was only producing 16 points. But then, if you take those same 20 shots and turn them all to three-pointers and put them in a league where they're making them at a clip of nearly 37%, the average team is now producing 22 points on those 20 shots. However, I cannot emphasize enough what this does for floor spacing and how teams play defense. Because in previous generations of basketball, quite honestly, it just made a lot of sense to shade and send help or even double the best offensive player on the floor, because more times than not, you are preventing a really great offensive player from getting a high percentage two-pointer and forcing him to pass the ball to a teammate to get a low percentage two-pointer with a long two. But in today's game, when you're trying to send help or even double a great offensive player, you're now willing to give up shots that the offense is getting more production from than in previous generations. Now you may be asking yourself, if all of this is true, how is it possible that back in the day teams were able to maximize their offense and amplify floor spacing when they really weren't shooting threes, especially back in the 80s and 90s? And the answer to that question is the same way that teams maximize offense in today's game, and that is by manipulating the rules. This is Greg Ostertag, a 7'2", 280-pound center who played predominantly in the 90s for the Utah Jazz. And despite his nickname being the Big O, Ostertag was your stereotypical rim protecting big man. At his best, he would normally grab you around 7 rebounds and 2 blocks in about 30 minutes, and offensively only producing around 6 points on sub 50% shooting. And in terms of his ability to shoot the long ball, it was practically non-existent. Throughout his entire career, he only attempted 10 three-pointers and made 1 of them. So you may be asking yourself, when you go back and watch the mid-90s Utah Jazz, why is it that he is standing at the three-point line? And it's because the Jazz were manipulating a rule called illegal defense. Before the 2000s, the NBA had a set of rules in place that effectively handcuffed defenders to defend certain areas on the floor based on their defensive assignment. If their assignment was at the top of the key, then the defender could not go below the free throw line extended. And if the assignment was ducked off into the corner, then the defender could not break too deep into the lane. And the only time the defense could violate these rules is if they were going to send a double. But if done correctly, it wouldn't be reasonable for a defender to travel all the way on the other side of the floor without giving up either an open look or a clear cut to the basket. Now, why exactly is all this important? Well, for 2 reasons. The first one is to show you that even in the 90s, without three-point shooting, teams figured out ways to give their best offensive player proper floor spacing, even if it meant to manipulate the rules. But 2, and more importantly, because of this rule that was in place, it essentially allowed teams to prioritize defensive specialists, even if it meant that they were offensively inept, because those same players were still able to provide the value of a floor spacer without being a floor spacer. So when ex-NBA players say, "Back in my day, there was a lot more better defenders," technically speaking, they are correct. It made sense to have an abundance of defensive specialists and oversized big men such as Dennis Rodman, Charles Oakley, Mark Eaton, and Greg Ostertag, who are offensively limited because teams very rarely, if ever, felt the true consequences of those limitations. But then heading into the 2000s, the NBA changed the rules, took out illegal defense, but those defensive specialists didn't just magically disappear. For the next 10 to 15 seasons, defense ran supreme, as defenders were able to move around the floor freely where they were needed, while the offense was struggling as they were trying to figure out the proper way to space out the floor while effectively playing 4-on-5. So now you basically have a bunch of defensive specialists who are now presenting as offensive liabilities because the restrictions have been lifted off the defense to actually defend them, which effectively just made it 2 times harder to score in the NBA once they remove illegal defense. And this is the biggest reason why offense was the worst it had ever been between 1999 and 2004 since the NBA introduced a three-point line. And once offenses start to realize how much they was hurting their production, in came an influx of three-point shooting, which leads us to where we are today, in a league where great offensive players are surrounded with ample floor spacing, which then leaves defenses to make very sophisticated decisions on the fly. Because if the opposing team does make it their priority to stop an offensive weapon from having an historic night, then essentially will leave supporting cast members receiving some of the most highly effective shots that the league has ever seen. Marriage this with the offensive open-mindedness to allow the best passer and playmaker to also be the best scorer on the team as well, and also allowing the offense to organize facing the basket, so even when the help comes, it makes it easier for the great offensive weapon to read the defense accordingly and to make great reads, even if that means making a pass all the way across court. And now you have a league where offense is optimized to another level that we've never seen before. And for the people out there who want to claim that there aren't any great defenders in today's league, that's certainly not true. There are several teams that feature really good defenders such as Alex Russo, Dillon Brooks, Drew Holiday, and there was even a team that featured Pat Bev, Kawhi Leonard, and Paul George, but even those units are still susceptible to great offensive performances because the best scorer on the opposing team once more tends to also be the best ball handler and passer, which then makes it significantly easier for the great offensive weapon to hunt out certain mismatches. And if you carefully watch some of the great scoring performances that we've seen over the last 30 days, in particular what Luka did to the Atlanta Hawks, you can see all of this unfold. If Atlanta shaded over a little bit too much, then someone was open for a dunk. If they decided to double Luka, regardless of how aggressive it was, he was still able to find the open man. And even if that player didn't miss that shot, it still conditioned the defense to know that regardless of how difficult we make it for him, he's still skilled enough to make the right pass, even when he shouldn't even be able to see that player. And even when Atlanta put a competent defender in front of Luka, he still decided to hunt a weaker defender in Trae Young to make it easier for him to score. So for the people out there who are hypercritical on what they see in today's game, sure, some of the attention to detail in some of these great scoring performances certainly has been questionable. However, I can go throughout NBA history and every great scoring performances in any era and show you highlights of questionable defense. And of course, I'm not opposed, and honestly, I do believe they should implement better rules in the NBA to allow more physical play on the perimeter, especially because the flopping has just gotten completely out of hand. And it is undeniably true that there used to be more defensive specialists back in the day than there is in today's league. But even with all that being said, the undeniable truth of the matter is the reason why we're seeing so many great scoring performances with offense peaking at historic highs, because we are truly living in a golden age of offense. There's better floor spacing, innovative offensive schemes, and all around players are more offensively skilled in aspects that will optimize what they can do on that side of the floor in today's game than they ever have been in NBA history. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Please let me know what you think about the video in the comment section below. If you want to see more of me give you daily updates on what's going around in the league, I have a new channel called The Low Post. And if you want to watch NBA games live with me, I'm on a platform called playback.tv where I do that almost daily. But if not, as always, if you want to continue to receive great NBA content like this video, make sure you hit the subscribe button and notification bell. And until next time, I'll see you all later. Peace.